In the beginning was the Word. Every speech we do starts with nothing. And then we start adding words. We add more and more words, and suddenly we get a speech out of it. And the words have the power to transform our speech into anything we want it to be. It's always important to remember the power of words. And that words aren't just simply a way to get an idea across. It's a way to grab our audience and pull them in, get them excited about our idea, interested in our idea, thinking about our thoughts. Words are very important. Today, I want to take a look at two places where you can use your words very powerfully. One place is in your title. Your title is the first thing that people hear. And if you use words that hook them and pull them into your speech, that makes your speech that much better. Before they've even heard anything of your speech, they're already interested in it. They're already involved just by reading the title. Quite often, especially in people who are new to public speaking, people will forget about the title, not really worry about it, or just leave it out entirely. That's a mistake. Your title has the ability to hook and grab your audience and pull them into your speech right at the very beginning. So when you start your speech, people are interested in it and excited about it. But beyond the title is the speech itself. And the speech itself, there are lots of opportunities of interesting words. Words that hook, words that grab, words that clutch the audience and shake them and get their attention. And not only the words themselves, but the way we use the words, the way we string together the words is very important. I want to talk a little bit about ways that you can hook up words in interesting ways. That captures the audience, that interests them, that gets them involved. So, after your speech is done, they can turn to each other and say, "Heard the word?" Wouldn't it be great if you could interest the audience in your speech, get them involved in your ideas, get them thinking about your concepts before you even said a word? Well, you can make this miracle happen if you have a speech title that hooks your audience, pulls them into your speech. One of the things I want to talk about today are how to use your speech title to interest your audience using rhyme, using metaphor, using trio. These are three things we can use to really get our audience involved in our speech and interested in what we're talking about, just by hearing the title of our speech. Rhyme is very powerful. It's something that we did as kids. We were kids, little kids. We'd do little rhyming games. Bat, cat, sat, fat, rat. It was fun. Hooked us in, pulled us in. Now that we're adults, same fun applies. Words that rhyme have the same power over us. They hook us in to the speech, get us involved. The difference is, now that we're older, once we get hooked in, we start to think about that speech title. So, today's talk, Heard the Word, hooks everybody in because of the rhyme. Interesting, heard, word, it rhymes. Then you start thinking, what does it mean? What have you heard? What's the word? Is it something religious? Is it something else? Title hooks you, pulls you in, gets you started thinking about the speech before you've even heard it. And then, another thing you can do is use metaphor. Metaphor is where you directly compare two very different words. In other words, metaphor is the way you take two different words and you just slam them together. That's the power of metaphor. It slams these two different ideas together, makes them work. So with metaphor, you can get tremendously powerful titles. Let's take the word cancer. Cancer is a very powerful word. Just say cancer, and all of a sudden people get a lot of images in their mind. And if these people have been through cancer, or know somebody who's gone through cancer, that's a very powerful word that's going to hit hard. It's going to really make an impression. Now let's take the word ignorance. Not as big a deal. Ignorance, you know it, you don't know it. So what? Ignorance isn't that hard-hitting word. Certainly not as hard-hitting a word as cancer is. If we use the metaphor, we can take these two very different ideas and slam them together. What if we had a title called The Cancer of Ignorance? Two different ideas slammed together. All of a sudden, people are thinking of ignorance in a whole different way. Ignorance is like cancer. And we know how horrible cancer is. So cancer is like ignorance? How can this be? What's the big deal about ignorance? Why is it like a cancer? By using this metaphor, get people hooked in to the speech. Because they start trying to figure out, what do cancer and ignorance have in common? And the final one is trio. Trio is simply where you take three different phrases and you stick them together. There's something that's powerful about the power of threes. It's like ready, set, go. You put these ideas and you string them all together, and all of a sudden you have something very powerful, something very interesting. So if you had a trio, you might have three phrases like the greatest, the fastest, the best. And this is a powerful trio because it starts you out with greatest, leads you to fastest, leads you to best. If you just said these things by themselves, it wouldn't have much impact. The greatest is a title, the fastest, the best, But if you put them together, there's a ready, set, go. What's so best about the greatest? Why is it the fastest? What makes the fastest the best? Gets people hooked in to the speech with the power of the title alone. And you want to bump it up a little bit, you can create your own words. You can make up your own words and stick them right into your title. You can make up a new word, the bestest. So you have the greatest, the fastest, the bestest. And now not only do you have a trio, you also have this new strange word, bestest, that people have to think about. Titles are amazingly powerful because they hook people and pull them into our speech. You can use titles to get people involved. You can use the power of rhyme. Just having words rhyme gets people interested in the speech and takes them back to childlike sort of days. Gets them interested. Or power of metaphor. Taking two different ideas and slamming them together. And the power of the trio. Ready, set, go. Three different phrases that together add up to a whole new meaning. So for your next speech, think about the speech title. Create a title that rhymes, or with a metaphor, or with a trio. Hook the audience and pull them into your speech before you've even said a word. Once you have looked at your speech title and try to make that interesting so it hooks and pulls in your audience, then you start to look at the speech itself. Try to make the speech itself interesting and use interesting words. And there are a whole lot of interesting things you can do with words. And the really cool thing is they have really complex names, but they do really simple things. So you can sound very, very clever, very smart by using the fancy names for doing these very simple things. So I just want to run through how to impress your friends with complex names for some very simple speech ideas. The first name is alliteration. Alliteration. And literally, alliteration means to have the same sound over and over and over and over again. So if you have a speech and you want to talk about a presentation, you want to use alliteration so it makes it interesting, you can repeat the P sound in presentation. So you might talk about making a presentation that packs a powerful punch. That's alliteration. Presentation which packs a powerful punch. That repeated P sound gets the attention of the audience, gets them interested in what you're saying. It reaches out, hooks them, pulls them in, so they start paying attention. You can do that with any sound you want. I just happen to pick P. You can use it with T or with S sound. The important thing with alliteration is to use that initial sound over and over and over again, just like presentations would pack a powerful punch. Another thing you can do is called antimetabolite, which is a very simple idea. The idea is that you give the speech words in one order, and then you just reverse the order. So you might say, we can follow the leaders and make sure to lead the followers. So follow the leaders becomes lead the followers. You just reversed it. That's all it means to talk about antimetabolite. And the great thing about this is you're also emphasizing those main ideas. Leaders, followers. It shows up twice then. Twice you mention leaders, twice you mention followers. At the same time you said something a little bit different, but it gets people's attention. It hooks them, pulls them into your point. You're talking about leaders, and you're talking about followers. Cadmus. Cadmus is a pretty cool name for another very simple speech idea. Cadmus is where you change the natural word order. So you might say, you're in my thoughts, always. Now this is simply a fancy way of saying you're always in my thoughts. But when you switch it around and say, you're in my thoughts, always, using chiasmus, it has a different sound to it. It sounds a little more serious, sounds a little bit more, almost like a sermon. It hooks people in and pulls them into what you're saying. So you can use chiasmus, saying, you're in my thoughts, always, instead of the more simpler form of, you are always in my thoughts. How about a syndeton? Now these next things I'm going to talk about are very popular with politicians. And politicians do love to use a syndeton. Because a syndeton is where you list words without using conjunctions. That is, instead of saying this and this and this and this and that, or this or this or this or this or that, you just squeeze them all together. You might say something like, my opponent, Bob Jones, is a gun-toting, people-hating, evil-talking person. I did say it was very popular with politicians. You lump a whole bunch of things together. That no good, undependable, wrong-thinking, bad-headed, add anything else you want in there that you've heard from any political speech you can name. That is a syndeton. You take a whole bunch of words and you just string them together. Very popular with politicians. And another thing popular with politicians is epistrophe. Epistrophe is where you repeat the words or phrases at the end of the sentence. just to make your point. You wanted a man who's a winner. That man is John Smith. You wanted a man who could bring home the goods for our state. That man is John Smith. You wanted a man you can trust. That man is John Smith. I'm sure you've heard this many times in political speeches. Maybe you just didn't know what to call it. Now you have a name for it. Epistrophe. At the end of your phrase, you repeat what you want to say. In this case, that man is John Smith. Could be anything you want, but the great thing about it is you hammer that point home. John Smith, John Smith, John Smith, John Smith. At the same time that the sentence is just a little bit different each time, so you aren't just repeating John Smith, John Smith, John Smith over and over again. And the sentence starts to have a rhythm. It starts to be interesting. It starts to get the ear involved. And it hooks people and it pulls them right in what you're talking about. That's why politicians love these types of things. Another one is paralapses. Paralapses simply says that you're not going to say something, and then you said it, and then you say, don't worry about that. That's paralapses. Very popular with politicians, particularly if they have their opponent who's made some really, really serious mistake. You may have heard that my opponent is a man who was indicted by the FBI, that he was caught cheating on his income taxes, that he is despicable, that he's untrustworthy, that he is simply a bad person. I don't know anything about that, and I'm not going to talk about that because this is not the place to say bad things about people. You want to focus on the facts and put all those issues of the lying, the cheating, and the stealing aside, which other people are talking about, completely out of the picture. That's paralapses. You say you aren't going to talk about something, and then you cleverly manage somehow to mention it in the conversation. The great thing about it is, nobody can say that you actually mentioned it on purpose. It's always a mistake. It's always, well, I don't want to talk about these things. Other people are talking about them, so I got to kind of put it out of the way there. At the same time, got a great chance to put down that other point, or that other person. Very powerful, very useful. Now you have a name for it, paralapses. Couple more for you. Anaphora. Anaphora was the opposite of epistrophe. Epistrophe, you say things at the end. You repeat the end. Anaphora, you repeat things at the beginning. So you might say, you asked for the truth from John Smith. All you got were excuses. You asked for the truth from John Smith. All you got was more of his hemming and hawing. You asked for the truth of John Smith, and everything you got was just lies. Very popular again with those politicians, because it emphasizes now at the beginning. You asked for the truth, and then you contrast that with something different at the end. You can do this in a different way, but that's a pretty common way that it's used. You mention something at the beginning and you can have something completely different at the end. It's a great way to hammer that point home. So in short, you can either put your main point at the back and repeat it over and over at the back of the phrase, or you can put the point at the beginning of the phrase. Repeat it over and over again there. Whether you use epistrophe or anaphora, the key thing is to get that point across, to get people thinking about that point and aware of that point you're trying to make. And finally, metonymy. Metonymy is used by many people, not just politicians. Metonymy is where you use an object as a symbol for something larger and bigger. Common use of metonymy is when you talk about the crown, you're actually talking about British royalty. You refer to the British Crown, but you're not talking about just the Crown. You're talking about all royal people. Another common example, perhaps used a lot today with some of the situations we find ourselves in, is the sword as a symbol for war. So people will talk about the sword, taking up the sword, they really talk about going to war. And the sword becomes a symbol of this larger idea of war. That's metonymy. There are many different ways to hook your audience in and pull them into your speech just using your words. So think about your word usage. Use some of these things. Metonymy, anaphora, epistrophe. Think about how you can use these techniques in your next speech. You've now heard about the importance of your title and the importance of the speech itself, and how words can make your speech come alive, excite and interest your audience. How the title can interest your audience right from the very beginning, before they've even heard anything about your speech. Words are very powerful. So when we're doing our speech, we need to think about our words. Are we packing our presentation with a powerful punch? Are we using our words well? Are we thinking about what we're going to say? Are we planning out our thoughts? And what other interesting ways can we use words in our speech to make that speech come alive? How can we use words to make the speech come alive? What sort of things could we do to make that speech come alive? These are just some of the different ways we can use words. Because words have magic, words have power. When we use our words carefully in our speeches, they come alive for our audience. They interest our audience. They pull our audience in. Get their attention. So in your title, be aware of how you're using rhyme. Think about rhymes. What different rhymes could you use? How could you use them? Where could you use them? Maybe use alliteration or a metaphor. Metaphor, a very powerful way to take two ideas and pack them together. Or the trio, where you have those three words and combinations, three phrases. I came, I saw, I conquered. There's power in three, it's like ready, set, go. You just take off. Your speech takes off with it. There are so many different possible words we can use. The ways we use them and how we use them to get our audiences interested. And the cool thing is, now you know a lot of neat ways to talk about this stuff. A syndeton, chiasmus, anaphora. Simple ideas. Very complex names. But it's the simple ideas that make speeches work. It's the simple ideas that people remember. Make sure in your next speech you're using these ideas. Take a little bit of time before you give the speech to plan it out, to write it out, to think it out. Get some ideas in your head about what sort of words you can use and where you can use them. Remember how powerful words are. Remember how useful words are. Make sure you have those words showing up in your speech. Because just talking and talking and talking is boring for the audience. It doesn't interest them. It doesn't hook them and pull them in. It's your words. It's all you have as a speaker are your words when you get up in front of people. Everything is riding on those words. And if the words aren't interesting, the speech isn't interesting. So now you know how to grab people's attention from the title. Now you understand different things you can do in your speech. Gather interest. Different ways you can get your audience involved. Now that you know how to write a title, and now you've got some good ideas for the words you've got to put in your speech, what are you waiting for? Get out there and start speaking.